the introduction, the notion of post-mainstream was mentioned, which I always refer to as a kind of way of dealing with the center-periphery problematic, which in fact origins in my cooperation with Gordana Nuk in Zagreb. She was, or she still is, many years, artistic director of the Eurocast Festival, as you know. And through my stays in Zagreb, I also met many artists from Slovenia, like Emil Herbatin and others, also the people of the Nortung project, which I knew quite much about them beforehand, but it was nice to hear more about it. This question of center and periphery is very much also actual to place in connection with the Nordic countries, Scandinavia, where there in fact are two peripheries and two centers, like the south, the north, the southern Scandinavia as a center, and the north of the Arctic Circle, which is a kind of new post-mainstream area with this indigenous theater, coastal theater, which I cannot touch so much upon in this context. Let us see what the time gives. So the concept of post-mainstream was discussed in some discourse seminars at the Eurocast Festival in the early 1990s, alongside with the concept that Gordana Nuk developed, iconoclastic theater, that you might have heard about, and maybe there are different views of what that indicates. So this international orientation that was represented in some of the ex-Yugoslavian republics is to me strikingly strong and was important for an exchange. Even before, I think some exchange happened even before the fall of the wall. So this the new concepts for theater that happened to be discussed in a conference in Amsterdam in 1990, a new theater's word perfect, where also Dragan Thaig was very active. It was the time of his when he was a director of the Netherlands Theater Institute in Amsterdam. And he at that time proposed that the lexicon of new concepts that was raised in the conference should be published on the internet. And to many of us, it was too early. We didn't believe in internet publication yet. But this is a very precious memory to me also, since Dragan Thaig passed away some years ago, as you know. And also my friend Hans T. Sleeman, who also was present in that conference in Amsterdam, were some of the basis concepts that also he included in his book, Post-Traumatic Theater. But other concepts that were discussed were visual dramaturgy, recycling, not the least, recycling in theater, which is an essential thing to understand how development goes in spiral and not in a linear way. But let us take a look on what it was, the avant-garde in Norway or in Scandinavia. Yes, there was a dramatic avant-garde from Ibsen's last play, When We Dead Awaken, which was a symbolist play, onto Knut Hamsun's plays, which were strictly symbolist and fragmentary, but was in the shadow of the Ibsen tradition, which has dominated the Norwegian theatre a lot, for good or for better. This was a kind of drama, new drama, which was influenced by the need for new drama that was raised in France in the late of the 19th century, and they discovered the North. So the North became part of the international scene since around the previous change of previous turn of the century, like from 1900 to 1900. And this dramatic avant-garde, which also took place in Denmark and Sweden, is connected to the textual-oriented avant-garde or scenographic avant-garde. As I said already in one of my commentaries to a previous lecture here, this sampling of what happened in Berlin or in dramatic writing in Paris or other places in the Scandinavian countries was apparent. And so when did an independent avant-garde start in the Nordic countries, or a performative avant-garde? Well, you see here an image by a sculpture by the visual artist Egil Rød, which can give an implication. And you can move the scroll down a little bit. Yes, so let us stay with these images. So the Nordic performative avant-garde happened relatively late in conjunction with inspiration from the Fluxus movement in the US, as well as Polish surrealism, and not the least European situationism, which were successors to the historic avant-garde movement of the 1920s and 30s. And they contributed to late modernist conceptual art, intermediated and processed by, among others, Alan Kaprow, Tadeusz Kantor, Josef Beuys, and Wolf Fostel, all being a part of a kind of new neo-avant-garde mainstream, which also influenced the Nordic countries. But one special thing that has to be mentioned is the Nordic countries, established a kind of independent avant-garde with the Cobra group. Cobra, Copenhagen versus Amsterdam in 1948, which was an inspiration to say we from these countries of the north, and that included Belgium and the Netherlands, maybe hard to believe in today, but that was also the case with the Flemish or Dutch-speaking countries. They felt inferior to the dominant French language of the time, and by the publication of International Situationist Times in the 1960s, it's published in Copenhagen, it was proposed to make English the international language of art, since it was less hierarchic than the French. And this is a very fascinating detail which can explain how there was this change from French to English international communication. So this group, Cobra group, contained artists especially from Denmark and the Netherlands and Belgium. And one of the major participants in that group was Asger Jorn, who was very much inspired by the French philosopher Guy Debord and preoccupied with a geographically northern orientation. So this is the introduction to the northern orientation, which happens also with the rediscovery or discovery of the landscape, which also meant a link the Belgian writer had contributed to, that he was originally Flemish. So, but Jorn on his side was especially preoccupied with a geographically northern orientation and of the mythical structures of landscapes. More generally seen, this came to expression through the interest that situationists took in stone circles in the landscape of spirals and labyrinths, which again reflected search outside the common urbanized centers, to which modernism as such was more commonly attached, pointing also towards folklore and ethnic cultures, like the traditional popular culture of Scandinavia, with the celebrations, as you can see in one of these images. For the theatrical aspect of Nordic avant-garde, there was a combination when Odin was established in Oslo in 1964, but they were not very understood, and they got an offer to move to Holstebro in Denmark, which they did. and escaped the Norwegian situation. But Eugenio Barba spoke very well Norwegian all his life. Well, he still does. He's not anymore artistic director of Amfiteater. So the laboratory theater idea, in a way, took seat in the sense of establishment of Amfiteater, which became globally significant. So, in the Nordic countries, the avant-garde has contributed to development through being partly focused on landscape and preoccupied with the interplay between man and nature as context. Something that also can be traced back to the dramatic avant-garde of the early 20th century, especially with Hamsun, Knut Hamsun, and to some extent with Ibsen's latest plays. His women always come from the north, and they are maybe of indigenous origin, and so they become femme fatale, to put it humoristically. So this turning around the situationism would be important to the development of a new avant-garde, which was based in Copenhagen in Denmark and in Skåne in southern Sweden. And they were attached with the international situationist movement, which Ars Johan was a member of. And the idea of the national situationist movement was to liberate art audiences from the effects of an ongoing process of commercialization of the artwork. So it was about who is going to dominate the leisure time of the new working class, having obtained leisure time by social democratic actions. And this is something that Guy Debord discusses in the book The Society of the Spectacle, 1967. In this, one can see an echo of Bertolt Brecht's criticism of Aristotelian or conventional dramatic theater. Performance art as a term was not established until 1970, when Rosely Goldberg has stated that it became accepted as a medium for artistic expression. However, in the 1960s, there were performative actions on the basis of the situationist movement in Denmark, which also jumped over to Norway. Despite the board's criticism, art has always had something to do with the show and show, although not in the simple direct manner. Show or showing, or the fallacy of theater as an illusion, ideas going back to Platon, had a new start in the criticism of Guy Debord, which is reflected also in the notion of pure theater, arte povera in visual art, as they expressed it in Italy. But for anyhow, the theatrical body slightly becomes, or the artist's body, it's not only a question of the theatrical body, but the artist's body becomes a biographical body, a performative body, by way of personal stories which the performers or actors share with the audience, a sharing process that takes place in a significant environment and in an interactive setting. So how can we understand this development or this situation, which is of a non-mimetic and non-linear kind, be it in performativity related to theatrical performance or visual art and performance art as such? How can art from the 1960s and 70s be seen in relationship to development that took place decades later during the 1990s and early 2000s, so indicating the neo-avant-garde or the post-avant-garde? The constant through all of these decades appears to be a move towards transgressing the classical romantic notion of genre, which for so long was dominant for both Western and Soviet cultural politics, also for social democratic cultural politics, despite the big differences existing between them. So one of the we often believe that situationist practices of the 1950s and 60s took place in a period of unlimited artistic freedom for artists living in Western societies, definitively superior to that enjoyed by the artists in the East. This assumption is actually not true, as exemplifies the post-war period in Norway, which were dominated by the inspiration from social realism as a kind of public ideology for the arts inflicted on artistic organizations. As I used to say to my friends in the old German Democratic Republic, that the difference is not so big as you think. There are restrictions. But these new groups of situationist inspiration, which I will tell a little bit more of, they developed artistic strategies that were provocative in its time, like Group 66 in Norway, in Bergen, which was an offspring of the situationist movement in Copenhagen, and also with Jens-Jørgen Thorsen introducing the notion of co-ritus. And this is a key notion, co-ritus. So if you scroll down a little bit now, even more, one more, and one more. No, you could scroll upwards, I think, there I'll find it right. Just go on, I'll tell you. So, and one more, there it is, yes. So you can see here some action painting situation, which reminds of Rauschenberg, but which actually is a situationist co-ritus action. The split between Danish or Scandinavian situationism and the French by Guy Debord was in the insistence that art has an aesthetic aspect, which has to do with the explosion in aesthetic expression as such, whereas Guy Debord thought that art would be abolished, but that did not happen. But that split made a great impression at the time. So the international avant-gardism arrived in Scandinavia through the Danish participation in the Cobra Group. Then Asger Jorn, who was based in Copenhagen, wanted to assure a free or unlimited artistic practice untouched by financial and commercial interests. It was important for him to realize creative potential present in all human beings. He looked for free zones of creativity that would result from an understanding of context and psychogeographical strategies, which is one of the offsprings of situationist movement, the idea of the psychogeographical, which also refers back to Walter Benjamin and his Passagenwerk, and also going back to the 19th century. Audiences or spectators were following Debord's conviction to be prevented from becoming passive consumers, and that's a key point. They needed to be activated through actionist strategies and through the experience of the marginal as a geographical and cultural entity. So it, in a way, gives a kind of peripheric ideology, so the marginal is what is in opposition to the mainstream, which also came to expression in many artistic actions. So, but Asger Jorn looked for the original Nordic, and he, together with other situationists, researched spirals and labyrinths of stones found in nature or belonging to prehistoric culture. Spiral-shaped labyrinths were seen by them as topographic symbols beyond ordinary understanding and connected to perceptions of endlessness. And endlessness, which also can be seen in connection with the Arctic, the ice deserts. Such attitude led to a new interest on global regions outside Europe, as well as gave inspiration to the development of indigenous theater and indigenous art. But before showing that example, if you see I move the arrow here, the choresis action is watched by the audience, and there are two artists here, Jens-Jürgen Thorsen here in a women's dress, and a Bergen painter, who, and they dance while they are painting. So this is a good example of a choretus action, and the concept of choretus is has not reached outside Scandinavia. I've never seen references to choretus outside Scandinavia. It's very interesting. But it makes it a kind of typical Scandinavian avant-garde expression, and this was connected to the notion of the landscape as a kind of expression of a situation, of a mental situation. The landscape and mentality goes together. And there is also the interest for the indigenous. If you scroll down now a little bit more, and even more, and even more. So I think one more. Yes, this is Laurie Grund's image or painting of a Sami lady who is crying, and you see the Norwegian coat of arms above. So there is somebody that are culpable, have the responsibility for this crying, which is of course the attempt to Norwegianize the Sami people, which is an indigenous group in the north of Scandinavia. And related to that, one can speak about the notion of non-orientable surfaces, which is an interesting concept which can be the basis for an understanding of landscape dramaturgy. So we can see here inspirations in all these aspects of also choretus from Black Mountain College of Art in North Carolina, Bauhaus, choretus manifesto was also shared with German artists. So not only in Denmark or Norway. And a series of choretus events were subsequently organized in Denmark and southern Sweden, as well as in Norway. So in an interview in 1966, Jens-Jürgen Thorsen, Jürgen Nash and his brother Jens-Jürgen Thorsen, titled "Art is Pop, Choretus is Art, Divided we Stand." And Jens-Jürgen Thorsen said that the position of the audience is non-existing within choretus. Choretus wants to abolish the notion of the audience, not like Schubses that bores them into leaving or makes fools of them by making dry caricatures of European theatre, but by making the audience co-creators. And that idea again touches upon the ambient and the immersive. And I could go on mentioning some of these choretus events that happen also in big cities like Copenhagen, and also inspired more local-based artists of the Norwegian periphery to come out. And one of them is Kjartan Slettemark, who in 1967 was responsible for a happening outside Kunstnernes Hus in Oslo. They were also the artists wearing a suit made of jeans fabric and decorated with a Norwegian folkloric painting, Rosemaling, rose painting, sitting on animal fur and playing tarot with 5,000 Mao Zedong cards. Slettemark's happening actions and performances share some of the choretus principles. And and similar actions can be found on the work of other Scandinavian artists, such as the Finnish Ilma Optimist or Roy Vara in Finland, or Sigurdur Gudmundsson in Iceland. But by the 1980s, action art experienced a conceptual turn towards classical performance. So you can scroll a little bit more. I think there is another image here. Well, this is another image of Laurie Grund, which is referring to the combination of the urban landscape and the Arctic landscape. And this idea of the landscape as a basis for a new way of conceiving action, and it gives us the opportunity to advance to a conclusion. I think it's time now for the conclusion, which is that some of the new companies of Norwegian and Scandinavian art or theatre art of the 1980s, also inspired by visual dramaturgy and what was later labeled post-traumatic, they were inspired by the avant-garde in the sense that they were recycling the avant-garde, but spoke some of them of themselves as arrière-avant-garde, arrière-garde, which is a concept that we heard earlier in one of the communications. Arrière-garde, like Bautruppen from Bergen, which became a kind of very well-known company touring in Europe in the 1990s, and they were mocking themselves. They were mocking the late avant-garde, and they wanted to create a new kind of style, which would be more ironic. So the postmodern generation of irony, as you know from the theories of Jean Baudrillard. Well, to put it shortly, in the Nordic countries as well as internationally, the avant-garde increasingly moved towards a fusion or mixing of aesthetical effects and contextual conditions, almost as when a tea bag infused in hot water sheds colors. So if you put a tea bag in the hot water, what happens then? That's a rhetoric question and nobody can answer, but final answer is, well, then there's a fusion going on, the water is prone or sheds colors. So the idea of fusion is very essential to what happens today, and which is a kind of aftermath of the avant-garde movement, which has been studied a lot in recent years. I think the brilliant edition of Scandinavian avant-garde has been mentioned and before was presented or was mentioned in the presentation of the new avant-garde book that was spoken about yesterday. And there is also a huge book on Nordic or Norwegian avant-garde of 400 pages, which is in Norwegian. It's not accessible, but to some extent, I hope my presentation gives you an image of what was the Nordic avant-garde from earlier the previous century until today, but we don't emphasize on the 60s and 70s, which is the height period of Nordic avant-garde in my